So full disclosure, I sit on a committee at the World Economic Forum that has been developing a framework for good work. And as I think everyone knows, over the course of the last 3 to 4 years, thanks to the good work of folks like Larry Fink and others, many organizations have been making some really significant commitments to ESG and a living wage for their workforces, again, for the last 3 to 4 years. As we approach what might be a bit of a double whammy of both continued inflation and reduced demand from a recession, I can't help but wonder how companies are going to live up to these commitments without a fundamental reset in a couple of things. One, the expectations of their shareholders, things that their shareholders have become conditioned to for the last 30 or 40 years. And two, how they actually run their businesses going forward in terms of their operating models. Will they be willing to accept lower margins and deviate from that legacy formula of 15% annual earnings growth and regular share buybacks that has worked so well in powering their stock prices for the last 30 plus years? Or will they be willing to no longer look to grow shareholder value at that pace, which has been in many instances through different recessions, largely funded through reductions in labor cost? And will they instead be willing to shift wealth back to labor to reduce inequality? The original reason why they signed up to these commitments of living wages and the like. My colleagues at Mercer have done some really interesting research over the course of, frankly, this last week, actually, with a group of CEOs and CFOs. And there's some really interesting findings. So this is hot off the press, has not been shared broadly. But 57% of CEOs and CFOs are planning a reduction in force in 2023 on account of what they see as being the impact of rising interest rates on their business models. 48% will look to increase variable staffing, i.e. gig workers. Although interestingly, 53% have no plans to provide any incremental job security to those gig workers. 34% will decrease, and 22% will pause all of their learning and development activities, which I find really interesting since learning and development has become so pivotal over the course of this pandemic, over the course of as our business models have increasingly digitalized and changed. Some interesting findings that don't give me a lot of hope for companies sticking with their commitments to ESG and the living wage. Now, counterpoint to this is a recent New York Times article entitled "Companies Hoarding Workers Could Be Good News for the Economy." I found that this piece particularly interesting. The writer makes the point that the new perspective on work is one where if business falls off, then owners of those businesses their first resort would be to cut the hours of their workforces. And this somewhat makes sense because the gig economy has sort of proliferated so extensively that talent would be able to supplement their hours and income with gig work. Second, those owners would be taking pay cut themselves. Note to many CEOs listening, that point about the shift in wealth from shareholders and owners to labor, and firing would be a last resort. I found a lot of reason for optimism there to counter the research that my colleagues and I have just done. But it did force a question, is talent the new cash? Is talent the thing that you hoard, which we have typically done in the face of a recession? In the face of a recession with rising inflation, we know that cash has finite value, and with 10% inflation is going to depreciate even quickly. My friends in Turkey, which is running at 83% inflation, talk about trying to spend as much money in the morning because it's worth less in the evening. But if cash is going to be shrinking in value, we know that talent does not. Its value can actually grow exponentially if you know how to use it, nurture it, and deploy it to power your business model. I do hope that all of those CEOs who are grappling with these challenges, the 57% that are looking to engage in 2023, actually step back and ask the question about where the economic power, where the engine of value in their enterprises really lies, and how they are going to frankly live up to commitments that they made during times of plenty, because those commitments are going to be sorely needed by the world at large.